All right, so welcome everyone to Neighboring 101. This is the monthly program class where we talk about neighboring, and we talk with leaders from all across the nation that are part of the neighboring movement and discover ways that organizations and individuals can use this idea of neighboring to improve both their community and their own quality of life. Wanted to give you just a quick update in the advice from my neighborhood section. To give you a little short rundown on the National Good Neighbor Day events that we held here in Greene County, and then we'll get right on to our first of our two guest speakers. Several of you have asked about the results of our National Good Neighbor Day, or what we end up calling Good Neighbor Week types of activities in this Greene County. The original idea was to focus just on our county, but word got out and we got submissions from all across the state, and so we embraced that. We ended up with 5,779 documented acts of neighboring all across the state of Missouri, and 2,523 acts of neighboring from here in Greene County. And I wanted to give shout outs to 4 of the state awards we gave. We also gave 12 awards just in Greene County for what we call the best acts of neighboring in their communities. But these statewide awards I thought merited a shout out. What we call the Best of Missouri Award went to D&L Florist in Houston, Missouri. They actually distributed free of charge 2,850 individually wrapped roses with notes on them about "Won't you be my neighbor" for National Good Neighbor Day. And they used other people in the community to distribute those to friends and family and neighbors, wishing them National Good Neighbor Day. That's 2,850 roses in a town that has a population of 2,900. So surely everyone in Houston, Missouri has been made to feel like it's a friendly place to live and a good neighbor community. Then the Rural Missouri Award went to Milton and Judith Moore in Agency, Missouri. They actually prepared 13 quarts of homemade hot cocoa mix, and they distributed that to their nearest neighbors with instructions and then a note about what National Good Neighbor Day is. We thought that was a great rural example. The Urban Missouri Award went to Elaine Montgomery in Springfield, Missouri. She actually organized what she called socialize and safe disposal event for her neighborhood. She had 90 of her neighbors show up for donuts and coffee and to get their documents shredded and disposed of securely. She got a grant for a company that came there on site. So that was a great service to her neighbors and then a great way to gather them as well. And then finally, the final statewide award that we called our Diversity Award went to Jose Mendez, also in Springfield. He made and delivered Hispanic food to his neighbors. And his neighbors included 2 elderly couples, a Chinese man, a widow, and two university students. So he has quite a diverse population right there around him. And we celebrated and saluted him with a diversity award. So that's a little bit from our neighborhood, what we were doing on National Good Neighbor Day. But I know you didn't tune in today just to hear from me. We have 2 great guest speakers on very timely topics. And I'm excited to be able to introduce our first one to you. Joseph Woodbury is the founder and CEO of Neighbor.com. Now, Neighbor.com is a self-storage marketplace with hosts and renters in nearly every city in the United States. Prior to working with, or actually helping create Neighbor.com, he worked with Bain & Company, which is a global management consulting firm, and at one time for the Senate Majority Leader in Washington, D.C. Joseph enjoys spending extra time, quality time that he has with his wife and their 4 children. And a man after my own heart, he loves reading historical fiction and biographies. So I know Joseph is a good guy just based on his reading preferences right there. But Neighbor.com made a really interesting announcement on National Good Neighbor Day. And so I invited Joseph to come join us today and share with us that announcement and some of those details. So you're free to unmute there. There you go. Sorry about the delay.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Really
thanks for being
excited to talk
here.
with you.
It's we've got a little representation from all across the U.S. and I know neighbor.com does work all across the U.S. So I thought it was appropriate for you to share with some of these opinion leaders and things. But so tell us a little bit about the big announcement that you guys made, second annual, I think.
Yeah. So one of the things that we think is important, and I'll give some background as to why this topic is important to us. Obviously, our company is called Neighbor, but we see the same things that I think you do, and that is neighbors are not interacting with each other on a regular basis as much as they used to. We think part of the issue there is we're interacting on social media, we're interacting through digital means and not having these face-to-face real interactions. It's become somewhat awkward really to interact with your neighbors. And so for that reason, we believe that in some ways people need excuses. Because it's awkward, they're not going to go engage with their neighbors. They need some reason to engage. That's part of the thesis behind our platform. We're creating a hyper-local marketplace. It's not a marketplace like an Uber or an Airbnb where you stay with someone in another community. It's a platform where you're able to provide service to someone in your own community. And we'll have customers tell us, hey, I've lived next to this neighbor for 5 years and I've never said more than hi to them on my way to work. I kind of wave to them if we both walk out to our cars at the same time. And then I was able to find their space and book their space through Neighbor. And then it forced me to go over to their house and they came out and helped me move my boxes in. And we got to talking and we realized we had a lot in common. It's just like that natural kind of a spontaneous exposure creates connections. And they'll even say things like, we realized we had a lot in common, and we realized, I'm a Democrat and they're a Republican and we don't hate each other. Just by having that face-to-face interaction. So we think this is really important. We think we need to get back to this nuclear community and in serving each other in our communities and doing things for each other, and even goods and services, not looking, outside, but looking to our community. And so we wanted to recognize the communities that are doing that already, because many communities are leading in this regard. And so we've done our best, and we refine our list each year and add new criteria, and honestly would be open to suggestions of what sorts of criteria you think we should be looking at. But we've added criteria that we're able to go pull the data and take a stab at defining who are the most neighborly cities in the United States. And this is the list that we published on National Neighbor Day. This year, I think Madison, Wisconsin topped our list. And some of the things that we look at in those cities are, volunteer rate, nonprofits per capita, charitable giving, happiness index. We believe, happiness is largely driven by your social interactions. And so if people are reporting higher levels of happiness, they're likely having more neighborly interactions. I think this call was started out talking about this loneliness epidemic. It's loneliness that often drives unhappiness, and when we're happy, it's because we're interacting with our neighbors. We look at crime rates because we think that crime is negatively correlated with getting to know your neighbors and caring for your neighbors, and we think most of our societal problems would go away if we would just get to know our neighbors and take care of our own neighborhoods. If everyone did that, we'd be fine. And then we also look at actually something that you guys are trying to incentivize, and that is neighborly acts, and how many neighborly acts are occurring in these cities. So across all those different criteria, we weight and then rank cities and recognize them, and we work with their local tourism departments to help get them publicity in major national publications, and so that people know that, if I go visit Madison, Wisconsin, it's a neighborly city. If I'm looking for some place to move to, this is a neighborly city that I could move to. We want to recognize those people that are making strides there.
I shared with someone at the University of Missouri last week who I knew grew up in Wisconsin that Madison was at the top of the list. And he immediately said, "Oh, I believe that. I can see that." He was not surprised by that at all, and said there's a high level of engagement in that town with nonprofits, for example. Nonprofit and volunteering is a big part of the culture in that community. And I know that that was one of the criteria used to measure neighborliness, I think.
Definitely. And you can actually see, I don't know if you'll share the article around, but if you go down to the bottom, you can see our methodology on that article. And a program like this, we'd be very open, as I mentioned, to, any suggestions of other criteria we should be looking at that are important in making a city neighborly for future years. Anyone's welcome to email our team that does this. It's just press@neighbor.com. Happy to answer any questions about how we think about this. And honestly, this is the vision of our company, right? We currently offer a very singular service, and that is allowing people to share space in their homes for storage. But our biggest asset as a company and what we're building is that we now have people in almost every large city in every state in the country that are interacting with people in their neighborhood. And that over time will enable us as a company to layer on other things. If they're already sharing space with each other, why can't they share different types of spaces or do things for each other? Or perhaps, you have a $2,000 table saw and I don't want to buy a table saw. Why don't we look to our neighbors to solve these problems for us? And so that's kind of where our platform is going. And we really hope to be the anti-social media platform in a way where, eventually we've added, all these opportunities to interact with your neighbor, and they're all physical, face-to-face, real, non-digital interactions. And we want to be the platform where people go for those non-digital interactions.
That's excellent. We had a speaker once who heads up the largest tool library in Missouri for a neighborhood.
Cool.
Where people can rent. So that may be a little bit of kind of what you're talking about here in some ways.
That's exactly right. We just think there's a huge opportunity in the United States, and that people desire it. They just don't have a resource to connect them. People want to look to their neighbors, and they want to know what resources their neighbors have. But again, no one's going to ask. It's an awkwardness problem. So that's what our company does, is basically solves the awkwardness problem. We come in and we build a platform and enable, give individuals the tools to list what they have available. And that bridges the gap and makes it a little more formal to where it doesn't feel quite so awkward, and it increases the level of interactions that'll happen.
I love that idea. Me and another neighbor are talking about starting a men's ping pong league this spring. That's kind of our big idea in our neighborhood, but neither one of us want to buy the $800 ping pong table that we have our eyes on by ourselves. So we want some neighbors to invest with us in this and move it around. But that'd be the same principle with a snowmobile or snow machine or snow blower or any type of expensive tool. So I love that. Is there, and then we need to open this up for questions from others as well, but where do people go to learn about this and about your company? Is it just the neighbor.com website, or are there other resources as well?
It's neighbor.com. We also have a mobile app. If you just go pull up your app store, whatever device you have, and search for neighbor, we'll show up towards the top there. And again, we're just getting started on this journey. We're right at the phase of, if you think of Amazon building an e-commerce model, they started with books. We're right at the phase where we're starting with our version of books, but hope to grow that into many other services in this local economy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think you'd have a lot of support from people on this call and others within the network and so forth. Anybody that's on the Zoom today, please feel free to unmute and ask a question. Everyone's so used to me asking questions, but this is your opportunity to jump in and ask. Anyone? Well, maybe that means we answered all of their questions. Can I ask you, since you're on for just a few more minutes here, a little bit of the information that went out in that same media release about ranking the cities? You also mentioned that neighbor.com had surveyed 1,000 Americans to learn about the qualities of a neighbor and what it means to be neighborly. Do you want to speak to any of those results from that survey, or I can ask more specific questions?
Yeah, definitely. And again, you can find these at the bottom of that same resource. But I'd say that the overarching takeaway for me was that this is not something that we have to teach people. People have a natural inclination to be neighborly. That's what we found in these survey results. I think it's like 79% of people have done at least one favor for their neighbor in the past year, in spite of what we're all feeling of the fact that like we're not in contact with their neighbors anymore. So it's not that we need to teach people, the desire to be neighborly. It's more that we need to provide opportunity for that. That is the problem to be solved. Is acceptable opportunity, right? And the reason I say acceptable opportunity is because there is this big inhibitant, and that is people want to do it, but they no longer feel it's socially acceptable. They feel constrained by basically societal opportunity to be neighborly, but everyone desires to be neighborly. No one just wakes up one day and decides they don't want to help their neighbors. So many other results came out of that survey, but personally, that was a big takeaway for me, was that people are looking for opportunities. One thing that came out of that is that the pandemic made people more neighborly. Again, the pandemic created an opportunity. It created a scenario where people felt it was more socially acceptable because of this public catastrophe to lean in. So how do we create that in times where there's not a public pandemic? Because what we found is that 7% of people did more favors for their neighbor, or more likely to reach out to their neighbor because of the pandemic. And 54% felt more concerned for their neighbors because of the pandemic. So that there's obviously a differential gap. 54% felt increased concern, and yet only 7% acted on that. Again, that's how much that's a good measure of how much constraint people feel. They feel increased concern and yet still don't act on it because they feel it's so difficult to do so, and to bridge those gaps. And we can blame many things for that. The media can be quite divisive, and we can talk all day about those topics of, there may be groups trying to divide us from each other, but more than anything, I think it's an opportunity gap. Just having those opportunities presented in a socially acceptable way to interact with your neighbors.
One of the things I found interesting from your survey numbers and the group of 1,000 that you surveyed is many of these points are twice as high as surveys that were done prior to the pandemic. So you have Pew Research Center, and you have State Farm Insurance from 2015, and the questions weren't exactly phrased the same, but some of their results about the level of activity with neighbors, for example, and how many had done a favor for a neighbor, that type of thing, were more than half as low as the numbers that you're reporting in your survey. So is the takeaway from that COVID made us more friendly?
We definitely saw strong indications in our survey that COVID did have an effect in making us more friendly. And there could be differences in the phrasing of the question that made people more likely to respond. But generally, our results made us quite optimistic, like you said, about people's natural desire and inclination to be friendly. And I definitely think the pandemic had an effect. I think there's more survey work to be done there to really discern that. But unfortunately, sometimes we need these wake up calls to spur us to action, and we may forget that on a regular basis.
Yeah, perhaps this is spurring people to action. That would be an optimistic view of that, and perhaps that's correct. There is one question in the chat box. So someone noted that in the top 10, there are no southern states in the top 10. And they found that interesting because we think of southern hospitality, at least in Missouri and elsewhere.
Yep.
So what your take was on that? And then someone asked, could you tell us a little more about the data you use, and is it collected from smaller communities as well?
Yeah, and we're always looking to reform our methodology here. I think actually in our 2020 survey, I believe Augusta, Georgia was our number one most neighborly city. So to answer the question, we do include cities across the United States in every single state. We look at the data for all cities, and the determination is essentially made entirely off of what the data outputs are. Now, as with any survey methodology, the data is one thing, but then how you weight that is another thing, right? And so, how much weight do you assign to charitable giving as opposed to, crime rate, as opposed to happiness index, across these things, as opposed to volunteering? Which of those is a more impactful thing? We weighted volunteering as the most impactful thing, and nonprofits per 100,000 residents. So those two things got the most weight, which could impact things. Perhaps nonprofits are less common in southern states. So again, this is where we're always looking to get better at how we recognize these cities. To the second question, Sarah, to your question, that also can be a challenge with these surveys as well, is that data sets can be less complete for rural communities. We don't create the data, we use the available data, and unfortunately for some smaller cities, the data can be missing or less accurate. But in today's world, that data is becoming increasingly common. So it's much easier to do these sorts of analyses today than it was 10, 20 years ago with the data available. That is one of the benefits of this digital age, is that there's data on a lot of these little communities.
Yeah. Well, one final question or comment, I guess, from the chat says, Joseph, I'd love to see your company come up with a way to connect people who are working from home with others in their neighborhood who are also working from home. Connecting people working from home. Maybe that's an additional business idea there.
Absolutely. We'd love to do something like that as well. We're actually encouraged by, I've written some publications about the importance of the workplace. Obviously, work from home has opened up a lot of opportunities to people who didn't have those opportunities in the past. the unfortunate cost of that is it's making us even more isolated. I was encouraged to see that things are really rebounding. In September, I believe only 13% of U.S. workers worked from home. And that's the lowest point we've seen since the start of the pandemic. So people really are starting to go back to work. Now that's across all sectors. If you look at like technology companies, they have much higher rates of working from the office. But something that was interesting in that survey data was that of those that did work from home, they asked them to estimate how many other people are also working from home. And they estimated that the average estimate was 40%. So people estimated that many more of their friends were working from home than actually were. So there's kind of a disconnect between what we perceive. It stands out much more in our mind when someone works from home. Back to this point though of the workplace being so important, you know, with so many community establishments disintegrating and you know, Rotary clubs and other community organizations not being quite as strong as they used to, and church attendance down, and these other community centers that we used to have. In a way, the last remaining vestige was the workplace. The workplace was a kind of a remaining community center, which brought people from all over the community together that may have had different walks of life and lived in different neighborhoods, and kind of brought them together to be in a communal space. And now that has started to go away as well. So it's encouraging to us to see people returning to the workplace and getting to interact face to face with other humans again.
Good point. Well, thank you. You're a wealth of knowledge on the subject area beyond just renting space from a neighbor, which if you go to neighbor.com, you'll learn more about that business model. But anything else you would like to add before we move on to our next speaker? And again, really appreciate you taking the time to be online with us today.
No, nothing to add. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to just have a conversation with you on this topic. It's something I care about very personally, and love that this organization that you guys have exists.
Well, you have found other people that take it seriously too and love the topic. So I'm sure we'll have future contacts, and at a minimum, we'll watch for your annual survey every year at
Sure.
National Good Neighbor Day to see what the rankings are. So,
well, appreciate it.
And thank you for being online with us today. Well, we're lucky to have two guest speakers today, and then I know of at least one other person online who's going to share a little bit from their community, from their neighborhood, and what they're doing. But Halloween is right around the corner, and so our second guest is Chris McKinney. He lives in Columbia, Missouri, with his wife Elizabeth, their 4 daughters, and a Pomeranian that runs the household. Now, Chris and Elizabeth write and speak all over the region, at least the area, and they're very passionate about helping people love their next door neighbors. And they are also the authors of a recently released book called Placed for a Purpose. Chris, welcome. I know from reading that book that you're part of your story is about how you turned Halloween into a great neighboring activity. And that's the topic here for the second portion of our session today.
Yeah, well, it's good to be here. Good to be with you guys. And thanks, David, for having me. My wife, Elizabeth, would have joined, but our daughter had a field trip, and those have been scarce these last year and a half. So she's with her, I think, at a pumpkin patch or something like that. But excited to be here and kind of share a little bit about our neighboring journey, and specifically how Halloween fitted into that. Kind of big picture for us, we moved into our current home about 9 years ago, and it's kind of the typical American neighborhood, at least from my experience, where it's very isolated and disconnected, and people would pull into their driveways or into their garages and just go inside, and there wasn't a lot of neighborly interaction. And so we were kind of in one of the more stressful, busy times of our lives. So we weren't looking for more to do, but we knew we needed connection, and we thought it'd be really fun to connect with our neighbors. And so a lot of what Joseph was saying, that there was an awkwardness there. So it was like, man, we feel awkward just walking up to our neighbor's door and knocking and saying, hi, we're the McKinneys. So we looked for excuses. We started making some excuses, and our first excuse to hang out with our neighbors was a fish fry on our driveway. And so and just a few neighbors came, but we started connecting. And so one thing kind of led to another. We kept kind of doing these events that led to more and more connection. We found our neighbors were just as hungry for community as we were. In a neighborhood that you would have thought would have been fine without connecting with their neighbors, based on what you observed. What we came to find out is everybody was kind of isolated and was excited to get to know their neighbors and be a part of something bigger than themselves in the creation of a community in this neighborhood. And so along the journey, as we began to get to know our neighbors, well, for sure, the first Halloween in our neighborhood, we like to go all out, and we're big Disney fans. And so Elizabeth is always coordinating, matching costumes. And so we were all ready to go, and we walked out our front door, and it was literally a ghost town, like pun intended, but seriously, like there were no trick-or-treaters out. Nobody was out in our neighborhood. And what we found is, because of the culture of our neighborhood, everyone was so disconnected. Everybody just left and went to other neighborhoods, and there were very few lights on. And so that was kind of startling, which prompted us to want to begin to get to know our neighbors. But as we continue to get to know more neighbors and begin to get a sense that people wanted to connect, we were like, this isn't right. Like, we know there's a National Neighboring Day, but we've always said Halloween is also, maybe it's National Neighbor Day Part 2. It's one of the only days where it's acceptable, right? Joseph was talking about acceptable opportunities to get to know your neighbors. It's okay to go knock on their door and say hi and say, hey, can we have some candy, at least, and make that connection. And so we're like, this has got to change. Like, this is not okay. And so with the few connections we had, we tried to get the word out. We used Facebook in our neighborhood and said, hey, everybody, stay in the neighborhood. Don't go to any other neighborhoods. Let's stay in our neighborhood and trick or treat in our own neighborhood and see if we can't get to know each other. And so that was one of the things. We asked people to sit outside on their driveways, and to get, if they had a portable fire pit, to move it out onto the driveways, or go, get one from Walmart for $20 and hand candy out from the driveways. We thought that might create more of a communal atmosphere. Maybe neighbors would gather around the fire. Maybe they would linger a little bit when they were getting candy. And then we had this idea of setting up what we call them stations, but basically asking neighbors to work together with the neighbors right around them to kind of pull off a station. So, one thing that we're passionate about is connecting neighbors, not only doing events where neighbors connect on a broad kind of neighborhood wide, but also with the people right next door to them in the neighborhood. So we asked neighbors to pair up, 2 or 3 other neighbors and say, like, I think that first year we had maybe a couple hot dog stations. So there was hot dogs and buns and chips, super simple, maybe some ketchup. And then a couple hot chocolate stations. So, table with some hot chocolate, some cups, and some whipped cream. And then I think, through the city of Columbia, we applied for a neighborhood improvement grant and got that, and bought a popcorn machine for the neighborhood. So we had that set up somewhere else. And so we had no idea if this was going to work, if anybody was going to stay, what would happen. And that year we walked out, and literally it felt like our neighborhood had come alive. There were people out, there were neighbors connecting. We were running into neighbors all over the place. We saw neighbors gathering around the fire, handing out candy. These stations became little mini just get-togethers on their own, where kids would come up and get hot dogs. People would introduce themselves, linger for a little while, and move on. And so it really, for us, Halloween really, then we had people just say how much they enjoyed it. Like, it was one of their favorite Halloweens ever. And from there, then it's become this way that neighbors could take ownership too. So we'll have a neighbor say, we want to do a haunted trail. We want to do a little, kid-friendly haunted garage, or could we host a station? Could we help out? And it's one of the events in our neighborhood where the most people get involved and get to help and feel like they're also contributing to this larger event. So then it's, just throughout the years, again, we've been doing this for about 9 years. So the first year it was very, very small, and humble, beginnings, but it's been a thing that we've really seen accelerate our neighborhood connection and connectedness. So
it's exploded because you were able to multiply efforts. You got multiple neighbors involved, everybody doing their own piece.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And so I think for anyone here on the call, obviously it takes time for something to grow to a neighborhood wide. But I really think even just starting small is really important. And part of what our job is, we help coach people who are trying to begin to learn how to reach out to their neighbors. And we've seen people, not neighborhood wide, but they just set up their own little station out front of their house, or they ask a neighbor, right? What a great way to get some neighbors, get to know some of your neighbors. Hey, would you help me pull off this hot dog station? We think it'd be a cool way to serve our neighborhoods, right? Parents have kids, they haven't eaten dinner, they're only eating sugar. They're going crazy. Let's get some, I guess I was gonna say real food, but I semi-real food in their bodies, and let's provide a place for people to stop and connect, or a hot chocolate station, or set up a couple lawn games where kids will throw something and win a candy or something. But the whole point is making an excuse to either get to know your neighbors next door, build some camaraderie, and to provide a place where neighbors will stop and introduce them. Where do you go? Oh, this is so great. Where do you live? Oh, we live 2 streets down. Well, that's great. You would have maybe never met them before, but they stopped at your s'mores station, where you have your little fire pit and some s'mores out and some sticks, and and you make that connection, and you get their number and they get theirs, and say, hey, let's, we'll text you when we're doing something else. So anyway, again, don't be overwhelmed by for our story, it's grown into something, but it's something that can work so easily, just starting small with one,
Just with that single step. So it's not up to you to plan the whole neighborhood out, but
No.
you can be an inspiration to get others involved.
Yeah.
We're doing hot dogs in our neighborhood this year on our driveway, and things. And my wife and I, one of our initial thoughts was, wow, that may really cost us a lot. And, but because we were expecting we're trying to plan for 200.
Yeah.
And really, I've got the grill anyway, and I went yesterday and bought all the hamburger buns and hot dogs and stuff, and I spent $110.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's not that much more money than buying candy for.
Yep. Yeah, no kidding, right?
In fact, I think I bought a bag of candy, so I need to subtract that from the amount. That probably puts me under $100 to do the hot dogs for adults and stuff. So I don't know. I think that's a reasonable investment, and for a fun activity that can involve lots of people. Let's see. We do have a question. I see that Alicia has a question. Alicia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask if you'd like. There you go. I think you're unmuted. Well,
okay.
There you are.
Hi. My name is Alicia, and I'm a community organizer, but I do live in a neighborhood that is not the safest, and so a lot of times that I want to create is community in my neighborhood, but we have a lot of families who are afraid to interact because of the gun violence, and so. What way can I encourage neighbors who are unsure about the safety, because there's Halloween coming up, and I kind of want to do this trunk and treat thing where each person will have not in their car, but like in the top of their car, like this big old bowl top of their car, and it's easy for people to go, instead of coming to your house, they come to the car and kind of go left, and they go all the way around. And so and I think some people kind of with COVID, I kind of keep in mind of COVID and social distance. But anyhow, so how can I encourage my neighbors who may not want to participate because of safety issues in the community?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's a great question, and you know, I like that car idea. I think, you know, maybe even just like a question back is, has there been other events or other things that you've tried that people have felt like that have gone well as far as connecting in light of some of those unique circumstances that could be kind of imported into the Halloween? Or is it maybe because of the time of day? I don't know if that would play into it, maybe moving the, I don't know, trying to get the word out about moving to a different time of day.
Yeah, so I had an event where it was in the morning. It was like from 11 to 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
But it was not in the neighborhood. It was like further away. And
Yeah.
then in like a more safer part of the neighborhood, and people were comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I don't recommend evening event because of the level of safety that occurs and
Sure.
unsafe activity that occurs at night.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You brought up maybe moving to a different part of the neighborhood. One idea I had was, I know there's different organizations that'll do like a trunk, and you were kind of talking about this, like a trunk or treat, where, you know, like you said, you kind of you drive somewhere, you get someone that's closer, that's maybe a little more communal or safer. Maybe it's a school parking lot, or, you know, I don't know if people feel comfortable going into a church parking lot or something, or a community center, and then you have people who volunteer to kind of have their trunks set up, and sometimes people decorate their trunks, like they'll get streamers or something and hang it from the, you know, the trunk's open, you hang it from there, so it's kind of this fun atmosphere. But maybe, yeah, maybe moving a little more offsite to kind of begin creating some of that community, and then seeing if that, you know, could translate into being able to do it on site. But yeah, those are unique challenges that require translating, you know, different ideas into, you know, the different neighborhood contexts that we have, because we all have different challenges with those.
Yeah, it can be unique things for each neighborhood depending on your context. Nobody knows that better than the people that live there, right? So
Right.
playing around and thinking about, is there a more central location in the neighborhood that would work better for everybody, or a different time of day? As somebody mentioned in chat, Halloween is on Sunday this year, so that would really lend itself well to an afternoon type of event through the neighborhood in the daytime. Unless the Chiefs are playing football in the afternoon. I don't know, might have to avoid that, but that's just a personal issue. But that'd certainly be easier to do it during the daytime. And then I know we have another question here that I'll ask. I'm going to share this one. I don't think Matt Fanning is still on. Oh, wait, I do see Matt. He's got a dog image there. I was hoping maybe Matt would be able to unmute himself and share a little bit about what they're doing in his Springfield neighborhood this year, Vintage Hills. It's, I think, a unique arrangement that's kind of developed over time. Matt, can you share?
Yeah, you'll have to forgive my quality. My service is pretty poor. But last year, because of COVID, some of the neighbors were scared to go door to door. And so what we developed was a trail. We have a trail that runs through our neighborhood. And we set up stations to where we could still interact with our neighbors, but from a distance. And just kind of, we trick-or-treated that way. Well, this year we're building on that even more. And we've kind of made a party up in our parking lot before the trail, and then the kids are welcome to walk down the trail. It's a haunted trail, just kid friendly. And we're just going to have food and drinks up there, and some karaoke is going to be happening. And it's excited for the gathering of our neighbors. You know, we've got a great neighborhood, and we've never been shy about gatherings, but because of coronavirus, we've had some issues with our events, so we've lost it over the last year. And it's nice to be able to get back with the neighbors and just visit with them again. You know, develop those relationships that we've been missing for the last year.
Yeah, man.
Really,
it's a great approach. And I think you mentioned that you'd had a couple of people in your neighborhood that really ask a lot of questions of their neighbors to find out what they wanted to do or what they thought were a good idea, and they really collected a lot of input that helped guide this decision of doing the haunted trail. So that's a great approach as well.
Yeah, we've got our Facebook group for our neighborhood, and in there we post questions, and we've got a couple neighbors that are just absolutely, they're gems for our neighborhood. They love planning events. We have a great 4th of July event that one of them planned and host, and then this is turning into one of those other ones where they, we just combine heads, and we just come up with a great thing for our neighborhood.
Yeah, you'd be commended for taking that on, and as Chris mentioned, making Halloween into National Neighbor Day 2.0, right? So, Chris, one of the questions that was posed in chat was how has the connection that started with Halloween impacted the other areas of your neighborhood?
Yeah, that's great. I actually responded to it just because I didn't know if we'd have time in the chat, but I'll reiterate what I said. I think what it's done is it's helped, like the block parties or some of those things are kind of neighborhood wide. But what Halloween has done is helped neighbors in different pockets connect more with each other, because they stay around their homes to pull off a station or to have a fire pit, and they invite a couple neighbors over. Hey, let's all hand out candy from our driveway around the fire. And so what it's helped is create these mini pockets of community around the neighborhood within the larger scope of the neighborhood. So instead of everyone coming to a cul-de-sac and having the block party, and you meet a neighbor that's new, that's great. What Halloween does is it decentralizes the event and makes it more like, around these 4 houses get together and try something, or these 3 houses hang out in their driveway and have a table with candy. And so it's really helped spur those pockets of connection in the neighborhood with neighbors right next door to each other, which has been really fun to see them develop their own unique little connections and communities, with those 5 houses and whatever. So
It's a great example and a great use of a natural gathering holiday, I guess. And,
yeah,
and a fun time. So great idea, Chris. Again, Chris and Elizabeth are authors of the book Placed for a Purpose. They're in Columbia, Missouri, and Neighboring Aficionados. Great resource, both of them. Now, you may still have some questions for Chris, and you're welcome to post those in chat. But while we still had some time remaining, I wanted to be sure and give everyone an opportunity to share about what they did for National Good Neighbor Day. I know there's a couple of you on here that did sort of special, bigger events, and was hoping maybe you would share some of your results from those efforts. Anyone, just jump right on in there.
Well, our church is launching a park right across the street. We own the property across the street from our park, from our church. Our church owns the property across the street from our church, and we're making it into a community park. We've put a playground in there. We just cleared out an old house. We eventually have plans to put an amphitheater in there. The city's working with us to put, and they gave us a whole bunch of picnic tables. We have an area for food trucks. So on National Good Neighbor Day, we had our first event in our new park. We had a food truck event, and it lasted all day. It started at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it went until 7 o'clock that night. We had 4 food trucks show up, and all day long, we had people who came and visited, and we decorated the tables with mums and pumpkins, and everybody was commenting on what a great thing this was to celebrate National Good Neighbor Day. I think it's just the beginning of planting the seeds in our community about neighboring. And it started raising awareness. The mayor was there and he came. And so, yeah, we're excited for what it did. My pastor at first was like, National Good Neighbor Day, what? Now he's totally on board. He tells everybody about National Good Neighbor Day. And so I'm super excited for what it did. And so I mentioned to him that in March is Won't You Be My Neighbor Day, which is Fred Rogers' birthday. So we may actually capitalize on that too in March if it's, it's probably warm enough in our area to do something. And anyway, it went really well and super excited.
Great to hear about that success. Remind me, what community are you in? Where do you live?
We are in a suburb of Little Rock, Arkansas called Bryan.
Ah, okay.
So a town
Very
of
good.
about, I don't know, 15,000, 20,000, something like that. Yeah.
Well, what a great kickoff. And that's great to hear the excitement
Yeah.
of others to join in. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I see Nicole Jones' name on here. Does Nicole want to share about her event for National Good Neighbor Day? Or someone else can jump in if they can beat Nicole Lee on mute. Oh, look, there she is.
Well, we got a lot of people who are really interested in it, but it didn't kick off as well as I would have liked. So I'm hoping that next year, because it was our first time doing something like this, I'm hoping that next year will be a lot more interactive. Because yeah, like I said, everybody loves the idea of it. So our block party was a lot of fun. We joined with another nonprofit called Hope Southern Indiana that works with homeless individuals and helping the community in like food pantries and stuff like that. And so we were able to do a block party with them in an underserved area, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm excited to see how it goes next year. I think it'll be a lot more popular.
Very good. Thank you, Nicole. Well, it's always good to learn from past events and things you think you might do better. We heard some of that type of feedback with our event as well. People that seem to be rather offended by the idea of winning a prize by being a good neighbor. We had done that because we thought it was an incentive to get people to report, but not everybody took it that way. And so some didn't report. That was where our negative feedback came from. And then someone had suggested maybe it would be a better approach to ask people to nominate someone who is a good neighbor and share about what they do that makes them a good neighbor. So I don't think the other aspect of it is going away next year, but I think we will probably add on this option to let people nominate someone who they think is a good neighbor and do some awards in that way as well. So either one works. That was one of our lessons learned. Connie, you have a question.
I actually have a report. Hello to all my neighbors online. Okay, first of all, I live in a very rural area of Stone County. We did some checking around and found out around Christmas time that we actually had 19 families living on a dead-end road. So we are kind of a little community. We even have a church left over from way back times. So we started at Christmas time. A friend of mine and I took a decorated Christmas cake to each of the neighbors. And I mean all 19 families. It was a lot of fun. Then we started out with the holidays, and we would put a little notice in everybody's mailbox. Now, I'm not sure that the postal office approves of this, but we were kind of careful, and we know what time the mailman comes through. So we always put our things in the mailbox after the mailman had been there. Okay, so at any rate, then we did 4th of July. We did something before 4th of July. What would that be?
Maybe Memorial Day.
Memorial Day, yes. We did flags and some candy and a little, like, hey, glad to have you for our neighbor, Then we did 4th of July. I think we did actually flags and candy again on 4th of July. We did another one for some special day, but our piece de resistance was on Good Neighbor Day or thereabouts, as close as we could. We invited everybody for a hot dog roast at my gate. Now you understand that we have gates here. We don't necessarily have houses on the road. We're all farms. So they met up at my gate, and actually 19 people and 2 dogs showed up. So we cooked hot dogs, and it was amazing. We got to meet people we don't normally meet and had a great time. So I'm thinking today, I'm so inspired by everything all of you have said that maybe it's not too late to get a trunk or treat together up at the old church for Halloween, because we do have a few children on the road, you know, maybe 10 or 12 kids. And I think it would be nice to do something for them. So I just want to thank all of you for your good ideas and just say that we're doing our best, and it's farms, so it's a little bit different here. Thank you, Dave, for everything you've done.
Yes. Well, thank you for that great report. And you're right. In a rural farm area, you do have to be much more intentional to get people together. You don't just exactly bump into each other at the mailbox or anything. So great job. That's an inspiring report. Are there any others? If not, we'll conclude up today. You're just as a way of closing out, I've got a 7-minute video that I'm going to show here at the end that is with Megan Ginn. She is a neighboring project manager with Community Resource Network in Orlando, Florida. She and I had an hour-long interview last week, but I whittled it down to maybe 7 minutes that I thought might be of interest to the group. And you're welcome to stay on and watch that, and then we'll conclude. Or if your time is such that you need to get off, I understand that as well too. I'll just remind you that next month we'll be hearing from Amber Allen. She's a human development specialist with MU Extension, and she has just finished a year-long research project and curriculum development, and she'll be presenting that over about 50 minutes. The topic is rediscovering hope, and part of the emphasis is on the impact that can have on your life and your neighborhood. So Amber Allen, Rediscovering Hope, is our presentation next month. And I'll close us out with this 7-minute interview. And thank you to everyone who is here today. Great session. Really appreciate our guest speakers. Where have you found success in getting congregations motivated to take action? And what does that look like? It probably looks different with different congregations, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like I said, we've kind of been intentionally looking more into this work over the past 18 months. So really started out by understanding who was already doing this work really well in the community, was able to identify about a handful of congregations that really had that focus of what would it look like for us just to not just to have a building in this space, but to really work for the flourishing of our neighborhood. And yeah, so I think from those conversations, just learning from those who have been involved in this work for a while, and in conversations we're having as well, I think one of the key motivations around neighboring is I think oftentimes people think that in order to serve or be engaged in their community, it's a massive commitment. Like I have to devote a significant amount of time, or I need to drive and serve at a nonprofit. And so just realizing that it's something they can do where they're at, where they're already working, where they're already living, can be, I think, a bit of a stress reliever for people. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's well said. Yeah. Are these churches that you mentioned that are maybe doing it better than others? Is the neighboring approach like the neighborhood around the church, or are they working to motivate members to? And I guess if you're trying to impact the neighborhood around the church, maybe members are working on it together collectively, or is it more of an approach to motivate individual members to do things in their individual neighborhoods?
Yeah, so I think we have some in both. So there are some, and Central Florida is not unique in this way, but we are very commuter heavy, to where we know with some churches, it's very fascinating. People are actually driving 20, 30 minutes just to attend their Sunday worship service. And so for them, it is more about what would it look like if our congregants were just engaged in their own neighborhood, because they know there would be much more widespread impact through that. But then we do also, I want to say it's a smaller number, but there are congregations who the ministry leaders or pastors have a background in community development, and they're specifically looking at a neighborhood right next to the church building and understanding what would it look like to really come alongside this neighborhood. But going back to one of the questions you had, what does it also look like to promote and support leadership within the neighborhood, and to start building those relationships and identifying who that would be.
Has some curriculums as well, because I don't know this, how to get it started, how to convince members to take action is kind of the part that fascinates me, and partly because I've seen so few examples of where it has been successful. I don't sounds like maybe you're saying getting them motivated to take the training and learn more about it is part of the secret sauce, but maybe there's more to that.
Yeah, I do. I think oftentimes we jump from like why someone should do it to how to get involved. So that could be, it's very much action oriented, like a checklist or join this opportunity or that opportunity. And I think while that can be great for short-term engagement, it doesn't allow them to build that posture, that motivation to sustain it long-term. Because you're absolutely right. There can definitely be bursts of motivation in this, but it's really hard to sustain. I think one of the things we're learning is especially, and we specifically work with Christian churches, but having a staff member who's going to champion this. Kind of like you mentioned in neighborhoods, you need someone who's, because it's a long journey, who's committed to the vision and who's going to take those small steps until it's there.
Oh, okay. That's a good word. So I'm going to champion. So when, a congregation is talking about, everything they're talking about on their calendar, there's somebody there saying, how does this relate to neighboring? How do we bring this to the neighborhood? Oh, we're going to do trunk or treats at the church. Well, how about we do that on people's driveways in their neighborhoods, getting people to think in that way. Ideas. And you mentioned commute times to churches. I absolutely relate to that. In Southwest Missouri, a 20, 30-minute drive to churches, I would say very, very, very common things. So unlike maybe in a smaller town, if you attended a church there in that town, you're kind of connected in this neighborhood. But if you're driving 30 minutes away, you're not really in the same neighborhood as the church you're attending. So that looks very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you mentioned you connected with a lot of churches who use the art of neighboring at the Neighborhoods USA conference. I'm forgetting his name, but he leads Doxology Bible Church, I want to say, in Fort Worth. I can look him up. I don't know if I've got his contact information. He mentioned they started with the art of neighboring, and what he does in their worship service once a month. He asks people to stand up if they've met a new neighbor, furthered a relationship with one of their immediate neighbors. And that was one of the few churches as well that we've heard that really implemented this into just the life of their congregation and didn't just do it as a short-term study.
With it pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had, as someone, I'll facilitate some of the curriculum we've developed for churches. One of the things that I'm constantly encouraged in from others across the country who are in a similar position is to have stories, because that's what's really going to resonate, and that's what's going to make that motivation for people to engage in this. Is, like you said, am I actually living what I'm preaching?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. That was Megan Grimm. She is a participant in this class and felt like some of her insights were worth sharing. And as my good friend Tim Detella says, May your neighborhood be a better place because of you. Thank you again for joining us.